Good afternoon, everybody. This is Septic Systems 101, our annual webinar hosted by the private well class on septic systems and septic system issues and maintenance. We're at the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And I do want to mention the private well class. Our program is sponsored, funded, and supported by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and USDA, and I'll talk more about RCAP in just a minute. So this webinar is for septic system owners, but it's also for EHPs and other professionals. And so we do offer NEHA CE credit for this webinar. And I want to mention that if you're a NEHA member, you can only get credit for this once every 2 years during your credentialing cycle. So if your credentialing cycle just started on July 1 this year, you wouldn't be able to take this again until after 6/30/2023. And so we did do this webinar last year on 7/13/20. And so if you participated in that, you can't get credit for it today and last year, assuming it's the same credentialing cycle. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@privatewellclass.org. And I do want to mention there's a handouts tab on your GoToWebinar screen, if you will, or pop up, and there's a certificate of attendance. We'll put a copy of the slides, or you can email us for those, and also the forms you need, as well as an agenda for today's presentation, and a worksheet that you can fill out for that. Okay. This is part of a national program. So RCAP is a national nonprofit that supports not only private well owners, but also community water and wastewater operators and supplies. It's rural communities, disadvantaged communities. They provide housing support, economic development support, almost anything rural related to lift up those areas and make them viable. They're a great organization. These materials do follow our private well class. I do want to mention, and most people get confused by these webinars because we do them every month, the webinars are not the class. There is a 10-lesson class, and I'll describe that towards the end, that you sign up for, and it sends you a PDF once a month or once a week for 10 weeks. It's got a lot more material than we can cover today. And so I recommend you sign up for the class, and you'll have that material available to you. And so certainly a lot more than about septic systems. It's just a very small piece of it. It's all about how water gets in your well, the hydrologic cycle, geology, well types, all those things. And so we do record every webinar, however, and as most of you who put questions in for today will come to know after today, we list a number of the questions you've asked as part of the slide deck, and we make all that available online for free as part of this video at the end. And so it's really worth your time to go back and look at past septic system videos from last year and the year before. I think this is our 6th or 7th year doing these, because there's different questions every year, and we answer. And especially we have Jim Starber with us from RCAP Solutions, who's a licensed sanitarian, has answered a lot of really good questions related to septic systems. I forgot to change this slide. The last bullet there is not true. I'm actually in my office today, which is a new thing for me since last March of 20. So I don't have to worry about my daughter interrupting, and our internet service should be pretty stable here at the U of I, and there are no mowers around right now, although that can happen too. Okay. My name is Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey. I'll be going through the material today on basically septic system basics. Again, Jim Starber's here. He's a licensed sanitarian with RCAP Solutions. He spent some of his career inspecting septic systems, and we couldn't ask for a better person to be on our panel as our panelist today, or answering your questions today. And Katie Buckley is my colleague here at the Water Survey, is an outreach specialist, and she's monitoring the question and chat tabs today. So if something comes up during the webinar and you have a question about it, you can put a question in the chat or the question box. She's making a list of those and keeping track, and we will go through those at the end. And if the webinar runs over, it frequently does when we're answering all those questions, anyone who wants to stick around, we'll answer them all that we get. All right. So a little bit about RCAP. Again, they fund all the work we do and our private well class program. They're made up of 6 regional nonprofits. Each one works in the areas as they're outlined here. Jim, as I mentioned, is with the Northeast RCAP Solutions, but and he's based in Massachusetts. But I'm in Illinois. It's Great Lakes Community Action Partnership, and so all of these 6 independent nonprofits are a partnership that work together to provide services around the country. And so there's over 20 of their staff, and they have close to 200 altogether that are working on private well specific issues in these 6 regions. So it's really a great program for us to have so many people with boots on the ground able to go out and help put on workshops in person, some of those things that we've been doing for a number of years through their regional nonprofits. So a little bit about the water survey really quick. Most people have never heard of us, even in the state of Illinois. Every state has a state geological survey, but Illinois is one of only 2 states with a water survey. We're celebrating our 126th anniversary this year, and it was established because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks in the 1890s. When that started, our state legislature created a group in our chemistry department at the U of I at the time to basically understand the water resources of the state and the water quality. And so this is from 1916. I show this a lot for those of you that have been on our webinars before, but it's really a great example. Pana, Illinois had a typhoid outbreak in 1916. The water survey went down to investigate, and everyone assumed it was either that they had a treatment plant they just built in 1912, but their mayor said it was too expensive to run, so they weren't using it, and only half the town was sewered, the rest was still septic. And so everyone assumed it was one of those 2 issues, but it turned out the Pana ice cream company that's listed there in the middle also sold milk, and they had one large vat that everyone dipped a bucket in to get their milk, and that ended up being the contaminated source, and 30-some people got typhoid, and that was solved and ended that issue in Pana. Some other things from our historical records, this is actually basically a textbook on how to build a privy. I think it's pretty cool since we're talking about sanitary issues, and any schoolboy of average intelligence and mechanical ingenuity can, by following these plans, build a sanitary privy for his home. And so that's where we were 100 years ago, and this was state-of-the-art way of doing things. This is the inside of a septic system, a very large one. And I just want to show the inside of this because, we're located on the campus of the University of Illinois, which is in Champaign-Urbana. It's Twin Cities here, and Urbana is about 80,000 people today. But in around 1900, this is what their sewage treatment system looked like. It was a large septic tank. That tower in the background is Alt Guild Hall, which is where our math building is down in the heart of campus today. But at the time, you can see that straight pipe running out of there. It's just a very large septic system. And that was the sewage treatment for the whole community at the time. So today we're going to talk about conventional septic systems. That's by far the largest number of those. And there's a few questions about some more advanced systems, and Jim will talk about those because he has that experience. I do not. But really, they're just a wastewater treatment system. And like anything else, they have to be maintained and managed. So they rely on natural degradation of bacteria to reduce the wastewater from your home, your shower, your toilet, your sink, so that it can then harmlessly infiltrate into the ground. It's usually gravity fed. I know there were several questions about that today, and not all are. It depends on the geology and the kind of soils you have and some of those things, and so it can really vary. But in general, a typical septic tank is below ground. It drops. It's a tank to settle the solids, and in those solids, the bacteria from our stomachs grow and degrade everything, and then the effluent on top separates and goes out into a septic field, and the liquids, and that's the piping system. You build a septic field so that everything can infiltrate back into the ground, where more bacteria can degrade that even further and make it harmless. And in many cases, it's just a natural system that works really well, and it doesn't cause any water quality problems. So this is what that looks like. Sorry about how not quite focused this is. Now this is a 2-compartment septic tank. So on the very left is the home and water coming in. You can see all the solids in the bottom of the first tank, the first compartment, and then the fluids move on to the second one where it further degrades and bacteria break it down. And then the water flows out through, when it's full enough, it flows through that pipe out into your septic field where it's perforated pipe. Typically, it's built so that it's all gravel and sand so that it can spread out away from the pipes right away, and then it slowly infiltrates into the ground below. So yeah, and this is again a natural system. It works well. You can see those solids building up in the bottom, and that's one of the things that you are required to do, is eventually those solids will build up, and there's things that are floating on the top as well. And so once in a while, you do need to pump your tank in order to remove those. If it fills up and those solids get to the other end of the tank, they can plug your perforated pipe, your effluent line, and that's where all the problems really start. So here's a couple more examples. This is a single on the left, is a single compartment tank. It's got one riser for inspecting. You can see the sludge on the bottom. There's a clear water section, and then there's scum floating on top. And then as that moves out, the outlet pipe, you have several kinds of drain fields that are listed here. Usually they're full of sand, and that's again to promote quick infiltration away from the pipe into the level bed where it can then slowly infiltrate down into the soil further. There are 25 million homes that have septic systems or on-site waste systems, some more advanced. You know, there's might be even more than that. That's based on estimates. There's not as many private wells out there, but you know, the number of private wells is growing a lot these days, and those numbers soon I think will be pretty close to each other. So when a septic system fails, you will know. If you have deep, thick green grass over your drain field or your tank, that likely means that it's not infiltrating down below. If it's working normally, you're not going to see any difference in your yard or how it feels when you walk on it. You can have, you know, pool of water can form in your yard, or your ground will be spongy. We had a person contact us who had laid sod the year before. I believe that was the reason this looked this way. But they had water coming up underneath that sod layer, and they could actually step on it and it would create a wave of grass because there was water underneath the sod layer, hadn't basically adhered to the soil yet. And so when that happens, you have a problem. You'll notice a smell, and then in the worst case, if everything gets plugged up, it can't run out into your septic tank anymore, and it'll back up in your house. So this can all be prevented just by knowing how to identify those issues and by following the proper maintenance for your system. These are really the issues you need to understand. It needs to be sized properly and designed properly for your situation. You know, you may need an advanced system if your home is built in an area where rock is at the surface, so you can't really put in a drain field, for instance, or it may be a certain soil type that requires advanced treatment or things like that. But also understanding that most of the rules are based on number of people. I know, I think in Massachusetts, they use number of bedrooms to size those. And so, you know, having a large enough system and then maintaining it as well are critical to how this all goes. So location of system, does it follow the regulations, impacts on wells and environment? I believe every state has septic regulations. Some are more advanced than others, and I'll talk about some of those in a little bit. Yeah, and so you also have a maintenance issue. Many septic owners don't know what they need to do. Some have contacted us, usually, and it didn't happen this year, honestly, but in most years, I get probably 15 or 20 questions for this webinar that are, how do I find my septic tank? And, you know, if you don't know where it's at, if it's buried and there's no riser that you can at least look in and see how full it is, or if you've never pumped it, those should be a concern to you. And I get some folks who will say, I've never had to pump my tank. Well, my answer to that is just wait, because you're going to end up with a problem. And you can't really fix a drain field that's clogged. You basically have to put in another one and in a different place. And that's really a challenge sometimes. So the best thing to do is to maintain it and make sure you're pumping your tank when you need to. So for sizing and design, it's really important to know the size of your tank and the number of people and all those things, just so you know how often to pump the solids. And so that's to prevent that from getting clogged or from filling up too fast. And understanding the water use in your home also helps define the size of your drain field. And many older systems, and here's really one of the real problems, is that many older systems actually ran straight to a field tile or straight to a stream. We still see those where I actually did a well assessment for a gentleman, and we found a junction box, but then there were only 3 pipes running from that, and they ran straight to where these field tiles were in the field that's next to their basically their farmstead. And so we also see those when you're canoeing along a stream. You may see some pipes sticking out, and a lot of times those end up being someone's drain field for their septic is just running straight to a nearby stream. That's illegal today, and some states have more wherewithal than others to enforce that, but it's still bad for the environment. It's bad for public health, for people who might be swimming or those sorts of things. So but people still do it. On the public health side, if you have a straight pipe to the surface, consider the impact on the environment. And so there are some new regulations out there on discharge. I know the communities, when they discharge through their wastewater systems, have to have an NPDES permit. It's a pollutant discharge permit that allows them to discharge into a water body, but it requires them to meet certain standards for the water quality before it can be discharged. And there's rules changing that are going to require more of that of smaller systems, including possibly homes. Jim can probably speak more to that. And then understanding where everything is. Do you know where your septic tank is, where your drain field is? How close is it to your well? How close is it to your neighbor's well? I know we had a question about that. Most states have setbacks for wells whenever you're installing a new well. And so before the well can be installed, whoever's inspecting all that should look to see where any neighbor's wells or septic systems are before a well is sited. And there are cases where that may not happen, or they may not know, and that typically can lead to a problem. If your well is too close to your septic, and your well happens to be a shallow well that's getting water from near the water table, then there's a lot more risk that it's going to cause bacterial contamination in your well. But if you have a well that's properly sealed and it's solid pipe down to 200 feet before it either has a screen or it's open, then it's much more likely that it will be protected from any surface issues, including septic. As far as maintenance, understand that they will eventually fail. Even with proper management, some septic systems may last 100 years, but eventually, just being in the soil, a lot of them are concrete, they're eventually going to wear out. But you can prolong that, and just by doing all the things you need to do. So you should pump them on a schedule based on size. You shouldn't put anything down your drains that will disrupt natural biological treatment. If you're putting medicine or paint or whatever and flushing it, think about what is amoxicillin, that you take whenever you have a cold or whatever. It kills bacteria, and if you throw that in your septic tank, you're killing the bacteria that might be doing the treatment in your tank. Also, other things can clog it up really fast, like cat litter, grease. Even coffee grounds aren't a great idea. They're harder to break down. When you throw a lot of solids in at once, it's hard for the bacteria to actually work on it or have the time to. And that's another issue there, is the amount of water you run through your tank. you don't have to really conserve water per se, but you shouldn't add water that you don't need to into your septic system, because the longer the time the bacteria have to break things down, the better it'll work. And so, yeah, that's where we're at. There are sources out there, and this is, again, one example from the National Environmental Services Center. They had a magazine that isn't published anymore called Pipeline, but it gives you an idea of the size of the tank you need and the pumping frequency based on the number of people in the household and the size of the tank. So if you have a 1,000-gallon tank and there's 5 people in your house, you should pump your tank every 2 years. And one thing I will say, and I might be getting ahead of myself, but if you have a garbage disposal in your sink, so you're throwing your carrot cuttings and pieces of tomato and all those sorts of things, then you should have the time that you pump your tank. Those kind of solids can't be broken down in a timely manner, and so they end up as part of the sludge and they build up a lot faster. And so the recommendation is, if you have a garbage disposal on your system, one, it's not recommended to have one if you have a septic system, but if you do, you should take these numbers and cut them in half to ensure you don't fill up your tank. And if you're unsure your tank size, which happens a lot, you buy a home, you're not sure, there's no material that you can look to, then you should just have it inspected and see how full it is, or have it pumped and then have it inspected a year later and see how full it's gotten in a year. And that will give you an idea, or your septic person an idea of how often it needs to be pumped. So on your to-do list, maintain the area around your tank and drain field. So you need to be able to get to the inspection port and manhole. You shouldn't have trees, concrete, or asphalt. It should really only be grass around your tank and your drain field. Those things, if you compress the soil and it compresses everything underneath it, then it allows for less drainage, because you've compacted the soil. So you want it to be free of any weight burden, and so those are bad. And trees, there's a whole industry for getting roots out of drain fields, right, and out of septic lines. You should just not have any trees nearby where that can happen, because they really cause a problem. And as soon as you clean them out, those roots come back. I mean, if you think about it, a tree root is going to go towards where there's a source of food and water. Septic line is a perfect place for it, and it's going to try to go there. Reduce the flow of water into your system, so you shouldn't have your sump pump hooked to it, whirlpools, or your softener backwash. They're just adding, in the brine and the softener backwash, there's a lot of questions about whether that's harmful or not. But in the end, that happens enough that you're increasing the flow volume through your septic tank. It's just not a good idea if you can avoid it. And then only put wastewater into your septic system. Garbage disposals, as I mentioned, they dramatically increase solids. You shouldn't put any additives. You don't need them. And I know that's a common question we get about using additives. And I'll show an example in the question part of this presentation about what the research shows, basically. Some people swear by it. Sometimes when I say you don't need any additives, I get hate emails saying that you don't know what you're talking about. But it's a natural system. It uses the bacteria in our bodies, and it works great as long as you maintain it and you're putting the proper things, only letting the proper materials into your tank. So no man-made stuff, paint, pills, I mentioned that already. And then you need to inspect your tank and have the solids measured so you understand how it fills up, how frequently for your situation, and then you can determine how often it's best to pump it. So I want to talk a little bit about the septic systems page on EPA's webpage. There's so much material here. If you have any kind of septic question, it's probably covered. And I highlighted Septic Smart Week. It's September 20th through 24th, 2021. That's a 1 week a year where everyone in the industry, every county and local health department and district, state agencies, all the technical assistance providers, again, everyone, even the companies, highlight and try to put out a kind of a media blitz and make everyone aware of how important septic systems are to water quality, to groundwater quality, how for protecting aquifers as well as wells. And so this page provides a lot of that information, and I'm just going to go through some of it kind of quickly. Okay, so if you want to learn about septic systems, I highlighted the information tab. You click on that, it takes you to this page. And for septic smart homeowners, it's going to give you a lot of good information about types of systems, how they work, how to maintain them. There's a lot of good resources here, and even there's an outreach toolkit for those who are professionals who might want to participate in Septic Smart Week through their organization. And so how it can affect nearby water resources, there's a little diagram here. I'm going to click on the drinking water. And so this is a great diagram because it shows you, typically you put your septic system and your drain field on the opposite side of where your well is, if you have a well as well. But in the big scheme of things, it depends on groundwater flow direction. The soil acts as a treatment device itself. That's the number 4 on this diagram. And so the water may be perfectly fine by the time it reaches the water table, or if your well's in the water table, that's where you need to be a little more concerned, because it's the water table is really water that infiltrates from the surface. And so it depends on the flow direction. If the groundwater flow direction were right to left instead of left to right, there'd be no worries. And if you had that information when you're building your house, that's what we would always recommend. You build you put your well up gradient of flow direction from your septic system, so it's flowing away from your house, not underneath it. This many times isn't a problem, and your well may be a lot deeper, because in a lot of places the water table isn't necessarily an aquifer, it's just where the ground is saturated. And so your well may be another 50 or 100 feet below this, and this all may be clay or less permeable material, and it may be fine. But understanding the geology is, you might be able to get the information off your well log. A good driller is going to include the geology that he encounters, or they encounter as they drill, and we use that information a lot to help identify where there might be problems or not. But it's just this is a good thing to go through and understand what all these pieces mean. Further down the page, there's this table on different things that can affect it, your septic tank, your drain field, and this goes on through all the numbers that are listed on that diagram. I went back to the top of the page. Technical resources about septic systems, especially if you're a professional, there's a lot of other information available, especially on advanced systems, which I have no experience with. Luckily Jim does. But these days, especially in areas where the geology may be considered sensitive and there's a risk of contaminating an aquifer, you may not be able to put in a typical septic system and drain field. Instead, it's more of an advanced system. You're actually putting in a very small treatment system, just like a community water supply would do, or wastewater system would do. And they treat the water before it's ever released, so it meets certain criteria. A lot of times that's taking out nitrate, but there's information here on what each state does. If I click on that and then scroll through this list, it's got information for every state. And then it takes you to a page like this one for the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, where they explain their rules and what they require, and what you need to do based on the state you live in, or maybe even the local health district you live in. And so this is a good resource for that, to find information about your state. I'll point out Massachusetts again, and not necessarily because Jim is on the call today, but because they have some of the most comprehensive information related to septic and wastewater in the country. They have, it's called Title V, I believe, and it's really an aggressive system because they're trying to protect, not only the Chesapeake Bay watershed and other things, but just it's the type of geology and water quality they have there. There's a lot of rules in Massachusetts to help do that, and it's actually, it's safer for everybody. And so there's a lot of information here, even getting testing. And so, yeah, if, and just like it shows on this picture, first time, start here. Click on that button and it walks you through a lot of information. why you need to get it inspected, all that sort of stuff. And again, those are just two examples, Idaho and Massachusetts, and you can look that up for your state. Yeah, and so I'm just showing that there. There's also webcasts that EPA or others, USDA, have put on in the past that have been recorded, just like we're doing today, on some of the information available. If you look at the webcast list, there's a lot of, some of them, there's about nitrogen sensor challenge, the first one there, but, own your future, home financing from USDA rural development. USDA has a program for low-income folks. One is for, really for wells and septic, and that's just changed this last year. It used to be just be for wells, but now it's also for septic systems. But there's also a program for home improvement if you meet certain income criteria. And so if you have, you need treatment, or you need to replace your septic system, this is, USDA is a place you can check out, and the programs they have to understand if you might be eligible for those, and you can talk to your state rural development office as well. There's information here on funding. Again, some of these things are more for organizations and others might be for the individual, but again, the USDA program certainly is. Like these 319 grants, I know a number of state or extension programs around the country that write proposals and get funding so they can do outreach and education or provide resources for water, for wells and septic through that program. And so in that case, that funding is not for the individual. There's a finance learning module on here as well. You can start and go through the series of, you can see over here on the left side, it's basically a set of PowerPoints that you can walk through that talk about these issues and how you can, case studies, funding sources, all that stuff. So, I mean, the point here is that the EPA has a very robust set of resources related to septic systems, and it's certainly worth checking out. And if you're a professional, I really encourage you to get involved with Septic Smart Week, or all year long. Put resources on your own pages. There's an outreach toolkit. If I click on that, it's got a lot of materials. There's videos you can put up on your webpage. There's handouts. There's brochures. All kinds of materials. These are videos that are available. These are short videos about a specific topic. This gentleman here is talking about why that's a septic field in the background and why that shouldn't be covered and why it needs to just be grass and all those things. And so there's a lot you can learn from going through this page and taking the time. And so I put that in there twice. Further down the page, there's information in both English and Spanish that you can download and use for your own program, if you will. And I know there's a brochure and guide for homeowners. This homeowner's guide is just 4 pages, but it walks you through some of the basics and what you need to do annually to understand how to take care of your septic system. Okay. There's even a link to the private well page. So it says right at the top, EPA does not regulate private wells, nor does it provide recommended criteria or standards for individual wells. So most of the private well world, like what I do, we all use the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act as the guide for well owners. So the national standard through the Safe Drinking Water Act for arsenic is 10 ppb, 10 parts per billion, or 10 micrograms per liter. So when we're talking to well owners, we reference that number as well, because that's what every community in the country has to ensure their water is at that level or lower to be considered safe to put out in their distribution to all the homeowners in their community. And so, well owners should be protected equally, but the difference is that you don't have a water operator doing that for you, you're on your own. And so, again, testing is the key to all that. And I just wanted to point out that EPA still tries to provide resources. They actually link to some of the work we do. The related links, the first one, private well training, is to the private well class R program. And I know the bottom one, the private well assessment and workshops, is to RCAP for the assessments they do for well owners and workshops that they put on. And so EPA is trying to certainly still help, even though legally under the Safe Drinking Water Act, it doesn't cover private wells. They're still trying to provide information out there for you. And there's a lot of good information here to not only our work, but other organizations like NGWA and the Water Systems Council as well. So all that said, it's still best to understand your local situation. Geology is different, rules are different, all those things. And so your best local sources of information are your county or local public health department or district. Co-op extension, they do a lot of work, especially in some states. I know Minnesota has quite a program. Also then your licensed septic inspector or installer. And a lot of times your local health department will be able to give you the name of those licensed to work in your area. And I know there's always questions about, well, how do I know they're reputable and all those things? That's up to you to do your due diligence. Ask them for references, ask your neighbors, ask, some folks like Extension or the Public Health Department may not be able to give you an individual name and say, this is the best guy, because, they're really not supposed to play favorites. We are under the same kind of rules, but you can figure that stuff out, and you can see who's involved with their organizations or their, a national association. If someone is a board member for some national organization, they probably know what they're doing, those sorts of things. And so that's how I would go about finding someone I wanted to use for inspecting or installing my system. There's other web resources out there like NESE, the National Environmental Services Center. Their programs changed quite a bit from when they first started doing all this stuff. Like in the mission, they had the Pipeline magazine, and it's not, I don't believe it's being published anymore, but there's a lot of good resources still on this website. I did not check it to see if all those are still available, but they have quite a septic catalog of information, and most of it's downloadable for free. I mentioned Minnesota before. This is a program they've developed with funding from USDA. And so there's a lot of, and this is not only for septic owners, but also for those that install them. It's a tool you can download and create basically a booklet to give, if you're an installer, to the folks that you just installed a septic system for, so they have better resources and understand how to take care of their system. Going back to RCAP, I want to mention one of the other things that they do. So this is a partnership. My program is a partnership with RCAP, and we do the online side of things, although because of the pandemic, we were all doing the online side of things for a while. But RCAP has, as I mentioned, over 20 staff around the country working on private well issues, Jim being one of those. And so they put on workshops in person. They work with local health districts, county health departments, extension, other civic groups. Anyone who's interested in putting on a workshop can contact their local RCAP affiliate, or if you can contact me and I can get you to the right person. You can see from the colors here which state you're in, which organization that is. You can look it up online, or you can contact me and I will get you to the right folks. There's one lead in each of these regions from the private well program. And the other thing that RCAP does, which is a huge value to any homeowner, is they do a well assessment. And so assuming you also have a well, this is an individual one-on-one, they'll come out to your home and basically do a site visit to talk to you about, it's a 9-page form. And I'm only going to show you this page, which talks about septic systems, because it gives you, in the end, they hand this back to you with all the information on it. It's like a record of everything related to your well. Not only your septic system, but if you've tested your well, what for, when did you do it, what did you find, what kind of pipes do you have, how, is there a well log, how deep's your well, where's your pump set, how do you use your water, do you have treatment, all of these things, so that you have a record and an idea of how your well and overall site, including your septic, what your situation is. And from that, they have the expertise to then say, well, you really should be concerned about this, or actually this is really done properly, everything looks great, whatever it might be. And it's also a chance for them then to impress on you as a homeowner, a well owner, why you need to test annually, things you might be able to do that would improve your situation or make it safer, make your drinking water safer, all those sorts of things. So it's really, it's someone coming out to take a look at your well, your site, the area around your well, and understand if there's anything that might be considered a vulnerability. So it's really a useful tool. And we developed this, or I should say, I facilitated developing this with a group of professionals. We asked 12 different people from different walks of the industry to work with us, and they all volunteered their time. And so this was a group effort with extension, regulators, drillers, hydrologists, and county health, or local health department folks to make this tool and make it useful for everyone around the country. And so what it is, it's really like, if you're familiar with the sanitary survey that's done for community water systems, it's really like a sanitary survey for a private well. It gives you a chance as a professional to go out and educate a well owner about their specific situation and their well. And again, every situation is a little different. It's really unique. Everyone's situation is pretty unique. Geology changes, well types and materials that they use change. Different drillers drill things, do things different ways, but it gives you a chance to promote best practices, encourage communication, and really just helps the well owner be more aware of what they have and why that's good or bad, or what they need to be concerned about. So RCAP's done over 2,700 of these assessments around the country. And again, many times it's requested even by a state or local health agency to help support someone who's called them with a problem well, and they just don't have the staff. And so RCAP will come in and, they'll be, a state health department may request them, ask them to go out and work with the well owner. They've also put on a bunch of workshops. Now we're doing those online to help train folks on how to use the assessment tool that we've developed. And and it's a good way to develop partnerships. And again, if you're interested in working with an RCAP person as a professional through your local health district or extension or whatever, just let us know and we'll get you in touch with the right folks. So a little bit about our class. As I mentioned, this webinar is not our private well class. The webinars are meant to support it. So the actual class is a 10 lesson that's available as a PDF that we send to you once a week for 10 weeks. So it's, you sign up on our website and it sends you the first PDF as well as a pretest. So the idea is you take a pretest, see how much you know, you go through the 10 lessons, and then we'll send you a post-test and we'll see what you've learned, right? And that helps us with the funding we get from RCAP and US EPA, and it also helps you understand what is going to be in these lessons by going through the quiz at the beginning. And so we certainly recommend, if you haven't taken the class, do so. And if you're a professional, again, through NEHA, there's a version of our class on their website, on their e-learning center. You can go in, you do have to register, but you do not have to be a NEHA member. Anyone can register on their website and take this class. And but if you are a member and you want the CEs, each of the 10 lessons is worth 1 CE. So you can go there, sign in, and go through each one. There's a quiz at the end of each one, and you can get CEs that way. And for the rest of us that aren't, well, I'm actually a NEHA member, but for those that aren't NEHA members, you can still go take the class there if you want to do the quizzes, or you can sign up and take it through our website. And it's just, again, it's that once a week marketing campaign. So this is a front page. You can click on Take Our Free Class or Learn by Email, and it takes you to a page where you sign up. Really, it's just your email address, so we can mail it to you. We ask for a first name and where do you live as a drop-down for state, just so that we can also show that we're actually reaching people all over the country, which we are, and including other countries. And then it's going to send you a lesson once a week for those 10 weeks. The lessons really cover everything. This is just an example of part of one of the pages where we've tried to show the difference between a confined artesian aquifer and a water table aquifer and how that relates, how recharge occurs, and the text supports all that. There is a Spanish version of our class, And so if you're in an area where there's a lot of native Spanish speakers, we encourage you to invite them to use this. And the entire lesson has been converted. We're fortunate to be at such a large university like the U of I. We actually had a young man who was getting his PhD in civil engineering who was from Columbia. He had a Fulbright scholarship, so he had no teaching responsibilities, and he was very passionate about providing materials for private well owners. And so he did all this for us. And so it's done by someone who is a native Spanish speaker and not translated by some machine, where a lot of times they get things wrong. And it's really well done. We're very fortunate. For each lesson, there's also a series of other documents available, and these come from all the sources that are listed here. So for the first lesson, there's also these 8 or 10 other documents, and I'll mention Raymond Lyle. You can see him here in the 3rd and 4th bullet. I never met Mr. Raymond, but he did a great job of explaining what is groundwater and what aquifers are, and we used some of his figures in our text. And so the idea here is to provide additional resources so you can do further reading and learn more than what we gave you in our short lesson, which is typically around 8 pages for each of the lessons. We do webinars every month, like the one we're doing today. We only do the septic webinar once a year in July. That's been a tradition, so to speak, but we've done them on a lot of other topics, including funding and financing. And we brought in a gentleman who works for the USDA program in DC to talk about that, as well as specific topics like lead when that became a big issue. We did 2 webinars, one in 2016 and one in 2018. We brought in an expert from Virginia Tech, Dr. Kelsey Piper, and she has done a lot of research on looking at lead in homes with private wells. And most of that is an issue with your premise plumbing, not the well itself, but in certain parts of the country it can be both. And so only because if the water's corrosive and your drop pipe for your pump, or your pump is made of brass, or those things, you can have some of those issues. But that's all explained here, including we created a separate page, which this is just privatewellclass.org/lead, where you can get to links from leading sources like CDC and EPA on, what do you need to know. So CDC has this 4th bullet on the first one, what parents need to know to protect their children. So it's meant to be a set of resources that you can use if you have an older home and you're concerned about lead. The first thing you can do is test, right? And that's the first thing you should do, is test your drinking water. And if anyone wants some more information on that, you can always contact us. We also have these 19 training videos. They were all short, like what is an aquifer, or what is a sand and gravel aquifer, what is a sand and gravel well, what do I do after a flood, how does my private well pressure tank work? So this particular video has had over 400,000 views since January 25th, 2016. And it tells us that, 1, there's not a lot of information out there about pressure tanks, and 2, that many homeowners have water pressure problems. And it could just be a setting, your high end, low end, off and on gauge for your pump may be set too low, or whatever. But this is a 4 to 6 minutes long, and it just describes that particular topic. And again, it's been pretty popular. Other things like, what do I need to know about a shared well? It amazes me how many people share their well with somebody else, whether that was intentional or whether they bought the house that way, and they do not have any kind of legal agreement in place. So if the well is not on your property and it's on the other person's property, or maybe there's 4 or 5 homes on a well, that all needs to be shored up, so to speak, or you're going to end up having neighbors that you don't get along with. When a pump fails, who's going to pay, the $2,000 or $3,000 to replace that? If you don't have a plan in place and you don't have an agreement in place, we see a lot of problems with shared wells, just as an example. And we've got a few podcasts. We've developed the first 3 lessons we put into podcasts, and the other 4, 5, and 6 there. RFD Radio Network is it's the Farm Bureau in Illinois, the Rural Farm Network radio program. they invited us to speak several times about wells and then graciously allowed us to use the audio. And so it's a good way to learn if you like podcasts about some of the basics on groundwater issues and groundwater construction. If you are a well professional or a public health professional, we also put out a partners newsletter. This is not for homeowners or well owners, it's for those that serve them. And so we provide links to videos that might be helpful or talk about a topic. In this case, we helped with a well sealing demonstration for about 8 counties in Illinois. We recorded it and created a video on how to abandon an old dug well. We try to put information every month about topics that would be relevant to you for some of the questions you might get from well owners, and also resources that might be available. So the goal of our program is really to give well owners targeted information and advice on why their well is important and why they should understand how it works. You can't ask a good question when you have if you've dealt with well owners for very long, most of the time well owners call for help when they have a problem. There aren't many who just call and say, hey, I'd like to learn more about my well. As long as it works fine, everything's good. It's when there's some kind of issue. And as a well owner, the more you know about your well, one, the better you're going to understand what the problem might be when you have one. And two, you're going to be able to ask better questions of a professional that you might need to deal with. And so it's really about understanding the basics about your well, the geology in your area, what's on your well log, if you've sampled and you know what the water quality is, so that you can talk more intelligently about those things to a professional, as well as you're doing more to help solve basic problems yourself, and that helps you protect your family from possible water quality issues. So that's what I have today, and the rest of the time we're going to spend talking about the questions you all asked today. And so we did get a lot of questions. There were 770 people registered, or 720 people registered, and it looks like we have about 330, and that's pretty typical. The folks who register, about half end up being on the call. If you have any questions and we don't answer your question today, you can always email us. And if you do have a question, again, the chat box or the question box, Katie's monitoring that, and it looks like we already have several that I'll get to at the end. And so we're going to go through the questions that you asked in advance. We put them in the slide deck, and Jim is here. And Jim, welcome. Do you want to say a little bit? I can introduce you. Jim is I think I already did a little bit, but Jim works for RCAP Solutions. He's a technical assistance provider, and he's a state lead in Massachusetts. But he also worked for 7 years as a sanitarian at a health district in Massachusetts and inspected septic systems. So he's certainly been in the game and has a lot of actual experience in the field, which is, super valuable to understanding how all these things work. And I know we're actually trying to find another person with a lot of private well experience to support our program, and it's really been a struggle. There just aren't a lot of folks out there that have, actual field experience with private wells who also meet some of the other criteria we want in a hire here. So it's great to have someone like Jim available today to help us out. I'm going to do the first one. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Oh, no, it says thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. So as I mentioned, we get a ton of questions about do septic additives work. And, this is a blog post from February 1, 2016. And so, our research on this and trying to read what everybody else has done says that really you don't need additives. If you aren't putting things you don't need to, you're not overflowing your system, you're only putting things that are supposed to go in a septic system. It's a natural system, and if it's properly sized and you maintain it, it should work without any additives at all. And so there is a huge market for those things. And so I recommend you go on our website and go to our blog posts and just search for septic additives, and you can get to this blog and read the rest of it. We do mention some other sources like Purdue Extension, and then this is also This is from Small Flows, which is another NESE document that used to be published. And the bottom line is there's no definitive proof that additives do anything to help a septic system. And that's my take on things. And so if you're properly maintaining your system, you shouldn't need to do those things. So the rest of this, I think about every other question here, I'm just going to lean on Jim. So I'm going to read him the question, and he's going to give you his thoughts on those things. So how long does a septic tank typically last? Let's just start with that.
I would say, typically 40, 50 years. I've seen them in the ground. We had quite a lot of building going on in the 70s here, and the same tanks are still in the ground now without issue. So, somewhere past there, it could go on to 100, I guess, if there's good concrete and it's not too deteriorating. I've seen more the the inlet and the outlets, more the hydraulic cement going around them fail as opposed to the whole tank. And they it's kind of an easy fix. You just kind of have to dig down and put some new cement there, let it dry, and do a test of it prior to. But that's what I usually see. But at the same time, the tanks in the D boxes, not the D box, but the tanks usually outlast the leach field, in my experience.
Okay, so leach fields typically don't last as long.
Well, yeah, that's where the end product goes, and if something goes wrong there, whether it be the moisture or the biomat gets filled through, or groundwater level wasn't, when they put the system in wasn't adequate, if you will, between the where the system comes out and the groundwater highest was, or maybe it even went higher with all the rain that's been happening. So typically I would see the septic concrete last a lot longer than the leach field. But
Okay.
then, that's not a set in stone rule, if you will.
And so what other, besides occasional emptying, meaning pumping your tank, what other routine maintenance should be performed?
In the septic tank itself, really nothing. When they're doing the pumping, I would definitely have them take a look at what we call the operating level. Make sure it's not too high on the pipe, not too low. Too low that you probably have a leak somewhere, or too high and something's going on, it's not flowing into the leach field. So we always want to make sure it's at that operating level, if you will, almost like a half and half to a third going out the pipe, if you will, depending on. But you want to make sure there's adequate head space, if you will, in that outlet pipe.
Okay. And so next question. So they're only using their cabin on the weekends, and how often should it be serviced? Let's just start there. If you're only 2 out of 7 days.
The one thing, if it's only on the weekends, but it's year round, at least you're continuing putting some volume in there. If it's like a summer home, and then you kind of go away for 6 months, I would recommend almost pumping it before you go away, because that whole winter, if you're not putting any effluent in there, you're not feeding it, you're not keeping it warm with the warm water coming in the house, it really goes dormant, and you're just really filled with just a tank full of water and sludge, if you will. The biological processes really slow down if you're not feeding it. But year round, it's kind of a in between type area, because again, you're not feeding it, not giving it a lot of warmth. But typically, if you're using it year round, you'd probably go longer than you would normally do. But if it's just a seasonal place, you probably want to pump it yearly, because you're really going to have that dormancy when you're not using it for those 6 months.
Okay. And then, so copper sulfate's used to kill roots. And so the question is copper sulfate safe to put into the environment? And if so, are there options for limiting roots other than copper sulfate?
I would imagine that copper sulfate would destroy the bacteria. If it's going to destroy roots, I imagine it's going to destroy kind of all biological life, if you will, to some point. So I always recommend cutting down the tree. I mean, even if you get rid of the roots now, next year they're going to be back. I mean, the tree's going to continue to go there. So I would suggest just cutting any trees that may become a problem right down, and just to minimize any, issues, if you will.
Okay. Is it ever safe to drive over the septic piping?
Not really. I mean, technically, I bet you, so, some people say that the PVC and the leach field, could probably take it. I've actually seen in commercial settings that there actually be a driveway over it with, venting and all that to get the air into the thing. But ideally, you really don't want to be driving over your leach field. It could cause a problem. Bigger the soils underneath, the bigger the car, it'll all be a variable. But at the same time, who wants even tire ruts in their lawn, if you will, even if it's not over the septic. So if it could be avoided, I would avoid it, if you will.
Okay, and so there's two questions here that kind of go together, so I just thought I'd put them both up here. So what is the gravity septic system?
Gravity septic system is basically when it runs without the help of any pump. So gravity is able to take the water from the house and put it into the leach field without any assistance from electrical, if I should say, if you will, as opposed to having a pump. Usually the pump is for when you have to go to a uphill area, whether it be to get to the leach field that is uphill to where the septic tank is, or more commonly for repairs that the current site doesn't meet the criteria, so you have to mound up the septic leach field, and so you need a pump to get it up that hill. But basically, if without a pump or with a pump, for both those questions.
So if a pump is pumping effluent, that seems like, and I know there's some pretty strong pumps out there that are used to pumping sludge and other things, but is that really a point of failure more than anything else?
Oh, ideally, they usually it will go from the septic tank to the pump chamber. Usually, there's a effluent filter on the septic tank going before the pump chamber to get any solids that maybe might have carried over. Then you get to the pump chamber and usually have two pumps in there alternating on and off with an alarm if one of them goes down. So it is a point of weakness for the system, but there's usually redundancy to at least have one pump going. And with that extra cleaning before it gets to the pump chamber, you hope to eliminate any issues as far as solids carrying over into that pump chamber.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting. I've never worked with a septic tank that has a pump personally, so
The one thing to worry about though too is some of those effluent filters will fill up before the septic tank, so those have to be maintained more often than the pumping of the septic tank, or you'll end up clogging your septic tank, outlet, if you will. So it's a catch-22. It keeps the solids or the oils going from getting to the pump chamber and then to the leach field, but at the same time, if not maintained, if you forget about it, it can end up plugging up your system, if you will.
okay. Okay, so is there a concern over homeowners using a conventional septic tank with a leach field rather than an aeration system that discharges effluent on the surface? And is there a preference, and should a properly functioning aeration tank always be recommended or preferred?
Usually when I see aeration systems, it's for some kind of advanced treatment, usually to get rid of nitrate. So it's usually in only certain circumstances. If a conventional gravity tank to a D box to a field can be done, it's normally the way it's done. So there's no preference between an aeration system and another one. I'm trying to get to all this.
Yeah.
And it discharges effluent to the surface in Massachusetts. That's just not something we do. So we don't discharge any effluent to the surface. It's all, in the ground, if you will. Different mechanisms to put it there, but it's always in the ground. So I wouldn't say there's a preference for one or the other, but it's just based on the circumstances. But if you can put a conventional system in without any electronics and all that, like a pump would require, it's usually the easier way for a homeowner.
Okay. So there were several questions about softener backwash, and we went round and round with folks where in some cases it shows that it's really not a problem, but I'm going to lean on these rules from Rhode Island. where it basically said the department does not recommend this practice. Instead, it's recommended that brine be discharged below the ground surface in a dry well whenever possible. I also realize that in some states you can't have a dry well. But the bottom line is, it goes back to, if you want your system to function properly, you don't want to put a lot of extra water through it. I mean, is that right? Is that what, are we telling people the right thing there, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, any extra water is not a good thing for the system in the leach field, as well as the brine itself, or any other thing that might be discharged as part of a treatment system. In Massachusetts, it's also required to go into a dry well. It's against Title V to put it into the septic, and it's actually one of the questions I always ask a homeowner when I'm doing well assessments is, if you have treatment on your well, where does it go?
Sure. Okay, good deal. Yeah, and there's just some more guidance from NAURA and the Water Quality Association. We can get you that information. Again, yeah, we work with Eric Yegi a lot from the WQA, and he's always been really supportive and helpful to provide information, especially on different kinds of treatment and information related. Okay, so next question. I have a septic system that's 46 years old, never been pumped. Pump it or leave it alone?
I would still have to say pump it, but you might be afraid of what you're going to find. 46 years old, I can't even imagine what it looks like.
Yeah, I don't, I think it's, yeah, I've had a number of folks say, I've never pumped my tank and it's fine. And my response is usually just wait. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
So
I had a gentleman 2 weeks ago in a well assessment told it was 15. And that was kind of, I think, the longest I have heard. So, if you'd like to send us some pictures when you do, please do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So for putting in a new system, how much difference would soil type make for aerobic versus anaerobic? Also, what are the concerns for using aerobic discharge for garden watering?
I'll start with the first one. Soil type's going to make some difference in it, but here in Massachusetts, really the anaerobic systems that I see are usually for site-specific areas. To get rid of nitrate or other type of issues, to treat it more so before putting it in the ground. Usually because of some sort of wetland or conservation type thing, or a private well or a public water well within the area, and usually just for repairs, if you will. If you're starting fresh, usually make it go the full Title V. This is more for repairs. And concerns for using aerobic discharge for garden watering, it's not allowed here. I mean, we allow gray water to a point, or depending on what kind of gardening too. If it's for edible, greens, and hasn't been disinfected per se. There's no chlorine used, so you may still have E. coli and other bacteria and whatnot in that water. So, I'd be kind of cautious there. And at the same time, putting that into the environment that's not exactly clean, like Steve mentioned. Part of the process for a septic system is to go through the soil and get further cleaning, which kind of, wouldn't happen, if you will, if you're putting it to the surface.
Okay. Can a septic tank be installed above the ground?
Not in Massachusetts. Be a cold winter, you'd probably end up with a popsicle. But I imagine in warmer climates you can. But it'd really be state specific, I would imagine, if you will.
Yeah, I've not heard of that, but it makes sense. You certainly see in warm areas like in Arizona and where it's never freezes, you certainly see well components right outside along the well, even pressure tanks sometimes, where you don't see that, here in Illinois. So that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
How can we rejuvenate a leach field that is acting sluggish? Is there a way to ream the leach field out without having to add additional lines?
I have seen it in if you have like a couple specific lines that are having problems, and the system can function on the other ones, the shutting them off for a minute at a time and let the area underneath them dry out has worked. This was only with one, line out of 10, if you will. So, one was failing, the other 10 were fine. So we shut it off for a year and then regenerated itself and put it back on. Now, if it's the whole field itself, I have heard of a couple companies that have ways they say to, relieve the biomat, if you will, or any kind of clog. It involves additives and aeration type thing. Can't tell you either way if it works or not, but if it's just that the water table level is too far up and there's nowhere to go, then that's a whole different ball game. So it'd be really site specific, but I mean, those are kind of three options really without being on site to see what's going on.
Okay, yeah, and I'll mention that, what Jim's talking about is, I think is there a 3-foot difference required?
4 feet.
4 feet.
Yep.
In Massachusetts, you have to have 4 foot below your drain field before it reaches the highest ever point of the water table. So there's something to drain, basically. So you have soil that's not completely saturated. And there's probably places like that in Illinois, but I've never encountered one where you don't have, like the water table here is usually at least 8 to 10 feet. And so most systems can go in and there's more than that. And I don't know if we even have that requirement like Massachusetts does. But yeah, I just want to point out where you're saying that gets in the way is if the water table actually rises higher, then you already have saturated ground. So there's nowhere for the water to go from the drain field. It can't go down. And that causes a lot of problems, which is why you have mounded systems.
Exactly. And then a lot of the systems, Title V was really updated to what it is today in 96. So any of the homes before 1996 didn't go through the same kind of evaluations of the leach field area.
Okay. If a system is older, 1956, and it was okay for a 3-bedroom house, but is now considered undersized by the county, will we have to change location of drain field when the house sells and inspections notes it's undersized? And really the reason I left this in here, because I know that's a state-specific question and we really can't answer a lot of those. Is there a new system that can utilize our existing field versus establishing a new field?
Probably not. If they make you upgrade the system, because really the field is based on flow as well as a septic tank. I've seen technology that will allow you to reduce the size of your leach field or reduce the depth of groundwater because there's extra treatment in the leach area, but I've never seen it. I put on a 2,000 gallon septic tank instead of 1,000, and I can keep the same leach field size. So not in the technologies that I've seen. If you're gonna have to upgrade, you usually have to, the leach field would be part of that upgrade. Sometimes you can keep the septic tank if it's the same size, if you will, that's required in the new code, but usually the leach field has to be increased.
Okay, yeah, I had no idea, so I thought that was a good thing to ask today. Hang on here, I'm on the wrong. Okay. What should a health department inspector look for at a system inspection?
What we did is we did several inspections, if you will. Of course, you looked at the plan prior to give them approval and the permit, but then there would be the deep hole and the perk test, basically when you would actually do the site evaluation for them to make that as-built to you to approve before they start putting it in the ground. The inspect the system as it's dug out, the ground, where they're going to put the leach field, where they're going to put the tank, if it's on the right gravel, the right grade, all that stuff. Definitely want to see it before they cover it back up, with water in it. If there's any alarms, controls, pumps, all that, you want to see it all before it's all uncovered. It's working, it's watertight, the seals they put for the outlet pipes. So, different departments would do it different ways, but usually it'd be at least at least 3 times on site before one would be finally signed off, if you will. Probably the most important one would be when it's all there, like I mentioned, all set up but not covered up yet, so they can get a full site, make sure it's all working, the alarms and all that prior to signing off.
Okay. Oh, that was a really good question. So, yeah. Is it harmful to run a bunch of clean water through a septic system?
Not to a point, not really. I mean, you don't want to overflow the leach field, but like I mentioned, like when you first start up a septic system, we're just running clean water through it to make sure everything's working as designed and not leaking and stuff. But once it's done, I wouldn't really continue to run clean water through it. Like you mentioned, a sub pump. It just makes no sense to put that into your septic tank, then into your leach field. You're just increasing the water flow in there. It'd be like having a broken pipe in your yard, and the groundwater just goes to the end to your leach field. It just, you want to keep it as low flow as possible, so the only flow going through there is the one you want.
Right. And I wasn't sure what to do with this question, so I thought I'd just ask because, yeah, I heard of a system that uses aerobic bacteria on the septic tank, AeroStream. Is there a real benefit to using aerobic bacteria versus anaerobic bacteria?
Well, the thing about it is, if you don't have an aerobic system, adding aerobic bacteria is just not going to work, and they're going to die.
Yeah.
The environment's just not right for them. So, I mean, if you have some sort of proprietary system that they say that you should add it, then that would make sense. But yeah, I mean, that'd be something proprietary. But like I mentioned, bacteria, we kind of, as human beings, put enough naturally occurring bacteria down just from doing what we normally do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that's so that's the questions that we answered in advance, but we do have a lot of actual questions that you all have asked today. And so I'm going to quickly pull those over to the screen, and we'll just keep going. So let me make this full screen. Okay, everybody, you can see that okay?
It looks good.
Okay, so do you recommend trenchless pipes?
I've seen them used. I wouldn't recommend them against any other technology. They seem to work just as much as any other technology, so it wouldn't be a preference unless it's, for a certain situation, if you will. But I've seen them, they work fine, but, I've seen all the other systems work fine too, so.
Yeah. Okay, so they have moles digging burrows on top of their drain field. What can they do? Also, yeah, we did have a question about that they didn't have deep greener grass in the area, and they said they do. They didn't realize until our talk today that this is a sign of a problem. But let's go to are the moles really a problem?
That's a new one on me. I mean,
but I'm thinking, I grew up on a farm. We had moles, and they certainly we don't want them necessarily but they're so close to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Know what damage they would do to the drain field.
I wouldn't imagine they would unless they kind of dug underneath.
Yeah,
I have seen like a paver patio being impacted because they dug right through like the base of it. But I would imagine the septic would be deeper than that. So yeah, that's a new one on me.
No, it's not adding any, just from what I don't know enough about moles, although I've certainly dealt with them when I was growing up. But I can't see that being a huge impact on your drainage field.
No, I don't imagine all their activity would be above it. So
right. And as long as you're not doing anything else above it, that's going to compact that more or whatever. I don't think it'll do.
Probably a good sign too, because if it's if the leach field's flooded, I don't think they'd be trying to live there.
That's probably right. Yeah.
So it's probably a good sign that everything's working correctly.
So, and they also said that their grass area is greener around their leach field, their drain field. Um, how much of a concern is that?
Yeah, with I definitely have to, it's something to be considered. If they're not fertilized in that area and there's no other reason why it to be greener, it's definitely something to be considered that it's not flowing through. The best bet maybe to open up the septic tank and again look at the level at operating level, and maybe if they have a distribution box after the septic tank to see where that level is. If the water seems to be pretty high in that outlet pipe, they might have a problem with their leach field being, no place for the water to go, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds that's certainly one of the signs we look for.
Yeah, so then, that outlet pipe, if it's not like, like half empty on the way out, just something's going on if the water's not flowing out somehow.
Okay, so I don't have a 2-compartment tank, but according to the simple schematic from 1982, there are two 500-gallon tanks. I assume both tanks need to be pumped and not just the first one. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would imagine both have to be pumped. The first one's going to catch more.
yeah, no
So,
doubt.
so, you might want to put them both in the same schedule. And if your pump it says the second one hardly has anything in it, maybe do that one every other pump, if you will. But, but yeah, your first one's definitely going to pick up more, just like a 2-compartment one would. The first compartment's always going to be filled with more than the second. You're probably going to have even better treatment because, you two separate settling tanks,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, with the pipe going in between. So I imagine it's more settling and more treatment than just a different compartment.
yeah. I imagine your first tank's certainly going to have to be pumped more often.
Yeah, because it's going to fill up quick.
Yeah. Okay, so can I put bleach and water down the pipes once a month?
I
Not sure.
wouldn't know what for. If it's something you bleach the house once a month, it's probably not the best thing to do, but I don't think it would completely kill anything out. You might want to over water after it so it's almost dilution. If possible, even leave the bleach out for a couple days and then dump it outside. The bleach wears off. Might even be better off than actually just dumping it down. But the bleach left open with open air, the bleach will dissipate after a day or two.
Great. Okay, so what is a field tile? Well, so what I'm calling a field tile is a farm field where they've put basically like a drainage field underneath. You put drainage tile say every 20 yards, and it runs parallel usually to a ditch or an outlet, and it's to drain the soil in the spring so that you can plant. In the spring, at least here in Illinois, we have literally millions of miles of drainage tile in fields here, farm fields for corn and soybeans and other things. And that's, in this case, that's what this was. There was a cornfield at the edge of their farmstead property, and there was field tile that had been put in many years ago, and it looked like it was going right to those. And he knew they were there. It's not something you'd see there below ground, but it's really just an underground drainage system to help get all the water off the field in the spring so that you can plant. Yeah, it's why Illinois contributes 16% of the nitrogen going into the Gulf of the, I don't know, is it 18 states that are part of the Mississippi network, Mississippi River network? But we contribute quite a bit. And it's because in the spring we're all the water that goes on our fields is going out through field tile and making its way into our streams and rivers. I hope that answers your question. Okay, I'm doing this probably not. Oh, see, that's why. Yeah. Okay, do enzymes, bacteria combos such as BioClean help to break up the solids in the septic system and are worth putting down the drain once a month or something? I think we answered that. I'm not sure what BioClean is, honestly, in particular, but you shouldn't need to add any bacteria, is my opinion. I don't, Jim, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a $1 million question that keeps getting batted around. I mean, there's nothing in any code that I've ever seen that requires anything, whether it be a traditional or advanced system to put it in. So, the one thing I can consider it might work is like the seasonal places when you first open up and you haven't really done anything to it, maybe to kickstart it if you wanted to put a little extra protection in. But there's no real, set regulation or set requirement or even set study that really I've seen other than proprietary, studies done by the people actually selling it that, that it's effective, if you will.
Right. Okay. Thank you. If an older gravity-based system doesn't have a riser, should a riser be added, or would doing so risk breaking such an old system?
I mean, I personally think it should be code that every septic tank has risers because, anytime someone needs to pump or have it inspected, trying to find it and digging up your front yard just doesn't seem like it's a good standard to do. I don't see any problems with it hurting it. I mean, I've seen a lot of the risers now, they're made out of fiberglass. They put, they'll, epoxy them basically to the top of the old cement tank and then, bring it to the grade. So I don't see, a concrete tank that's in good condition being hurt by it at all, especially if it's fiberglass, something like that. It's not even that heavy on top of it. But I definitely think it should be used and utilized. Should be code. If it's something, it definitely will help you keep an eye on your septic tank a lot more than if you're digging up your yard to do any kind of service to it.
Okay, so the next question is, should we add ZEP root kill to the toilet so that it goes into the tank and through the drain field to kill any roots that may be growing? Well, this is a popular thing. I just Googled it, and you can get it at every Tractor Supply, Home Depot, on Amazon. Yeah, I don't, I'm sure it's, I was hoping to find something that said, I'm sure it's copper sulfate. But I don't see anything that talks about it being, I mean, it's available at Walmart, so.
I would say anything with the word kill in it would probably going to kill your bacteria in your septic tank too. So I mean, it's a catch-22. If your drain field is in dire straits and you got to kill what's in there, but at the same time, you're probably going to kill, the bacteria in your septic tank too. So you're going to be starting fresh after that too, as far as the biological processes go of your septic tank.
Yeah, and so it is copper sulfate, and it also says it's safe for septic systems and pipes, but that's from the company.
So flushable wipes, according to the companies.
Yeah, well, I'm sure no one asked that question, and I forgot to add it. But any wastewater operator will tell you that flushable wipes really aren't flushable, and they end up being a huge problem. And not only for a wastewater system for a community, but for your septic tank. So you should never use those. There aren't any that really do what they say they're going to do. Yeah, I don't see anything. That's the only thing that says it's safe is from their website. So take that with a grain of salt. How do you inspect the tank to measure the solids?
The best way to do it is with a device called the sludge judge.
Yeah.
It's best way to describe it is a big straw. And the same technology you would use if you were putting a straw into a big thing of soda and you wanted to keep the liquid in your straw. You put your finger on top and take it out of the soda. Same philosophy. It's basically a big straw. You put it in there. Once you get to the bottom, you put the cap on, it would hold the column of liquid and solids in there and pull it out, and that would be able to show you that column of the what's in the septic tank. You know, how big your solids are in the bottom, your scum layer up top, and then how much water you have in the middle. So that's the best way to measure it like that, the professional way. So if a professional is going to do it and do an inspection, that's really how they should be doing it.
Okay. So as far as determining the flow direction, that really matters the most if your well is shallow. And if you have no information about your well, it depends on what state you live in, but you should try to find your well record. If it was in Illinois in 1982, we probably have that well log. I work at the State Water Survey. All the counties provide logs to us, and we house all of them. We have 450,000 logs for the state of Illinois. And I would use your legal location to find if there is a log. It would be helpful if you knew the owner when the house was built. But if you have the exact location, a lot of times, it's kind of a 50-50 whether you might find your log. But in an extreme case, you can ask a drilling contractor to measure the depth of your well and understand that. Flow direction, your best bet would be the USGS in your state or your state geological survey, or if it's in Illinois, the State Water Survey, or the agency like that, which, in Wisconsin would be DNR. It just depends. It's the Water Resources Organization. And so they're the folks that map aquifers and also probably have water quality samples to understand the water quality of the different aquifers. But you can use that information, like one of my jobs, I have several monitoring well networks around the state of Illinois that I put in back in the 90s, and we measure those wells, we take water quality samples from them, and we use that water level information to help define what the flow is in a given aquifer. But again, it's only if you have an older dug or bored well, and so you're getting water that's close to the water table. Still the best way to know if your well is safe is to sample for bacteria and nitrate. And and if you want to email us, we can talk about this more after at another time. So, but on a local scale, in a lot of cases, you just don't know flow direction per se, unless there's several homes and you can measure the water levels there. We've certainly done work where we've actually done that and know locally what the flow direction is in the aquifer because water flows downhill, and so you can tell the direction because of the differences in water levels. But that's not something most homeowners are going to be able to accomplish on their own unless some work's been done in your area. Let me go back to that for 1 second. If your well is shallow and it's the water table typically follows land surface. So if you're in a rural subdivision, for instance, and the road in front of all the homes is going downhill or going uphill, the downhill direction is where the water is actually probably flowing in the water table. And it's usually flowing towards a source, like towards a ditch or a creek, a river, or a lake. It's going to flow towards a low spot. And that's probably where your septic flow below your drain field is going as well. So when we moved into our house 10 years ago, the owners had a new system put in because the old system was too close to the well for today's rules and regs. It's an aerobic system. We have it pumped every 3 or 4 years. Our yard has lots of older trees. How far back is ideal for trees to be from a septic? I don't know, Jim, I'm not an arborist as far as how far roots will go, but boy, I imagine large trees are going to go quite a distance.
Yeah, I believe what I've heard, general rule of thumb is the tree's roots are double its height in all directions.
Oh, wow.
So, I'm sure it has variables and, kinds of trees and all that, but I heard that as a general guideline, which is quite, staggering when you see the height of some trees.
No doubt. Can we contact RCAP or the equivalent in Texas as an individual to get them to come out and do a site assessment? Yes, you should just email us and I'll get you in contact with the folks there. And it might not be right away. I know that the RCAP affiliate in Texas is Communities Unlimited, and they just had a retirement, and so there's some new folks there. But they can certainly talk to you and come up with a plan with you. So if you'll email me, I can get them your information. We have a lot of shoreland development in our area, and most of these homes have septic systems. One thing we're trying to do is encourage native plantings to keep our very sandy soil in place and not be eroded. Turf grass is hard to grow here. Can I get your opinion on the idea of native plantings on septic drain fields and or septic mounds? No shrubs or trees, just native grasses and forbs. You want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I don't see any problem with the native grasses. I mean, we always recommend, planting kind of a lawn all over your leach field anyways. So I imagine if you're in a sandy area and the natural grasses that are native to that area would be ideal to be there, because you would just be, if you try to put other grass down that's not native to that area, I imagine you would just have to water it or it wouldn't take. So I would always imagine, the native turf grass would be fine to have there, if you will. I will say, being a shoreline development area that's on septic systems, kind of reminds me of Cape Cod here in Massachusetts. Definitely some sort of oversight of those septic systems might be in order. Periodic inspections, mandated periodic pumping with reporting to the town of that it was pumped, stuff like that, to try to keep it in order, if you will, because it sounds like you're in sandy soils close to water on septic systems. It can get out of control pretty quickly and cause pollution and all kinds of other beyond water quality issues of drinking water, but even recreational, red tides or cyanotoxins if it's a freshwater body, like we see in some of the areas down near the Cape in warm water and whatnot.
Okay. Have you had any webinars about water filtering systems for wells? Not particularly. We have had a webinar that's on treatment, but it's really about, well, you can look that up on our website and watch the video. We had, it was a kind of a joint webinar with the Association of Public Health Labs and the Water Quality Association. And I think it was either early this year or late last fall. I'm not a treatment expert. It's something that I rely on others for. And so we try to stick to, or I should say, I try to stick to the things that I do know more about, or if I know someone like Jim that I can bring on to to be the expert, because I am not. So, but water filtering specifically, yeah, any kind of treatment. And I should also say we put on a conference every 2 years, and it's for professionals, not for well owners. But at our 2019 conference, we had a lot of treatment folks come in and talk about different issues related to treatment. And those were all recorded, and they're also available on our website and on our YouTube channel. And it's just a 2019 private well conference. So, and those are all, 20 or 30-minute talks on a specific thing, usually a specific contaminant and how you remove it. Okay, how can I locate my drain field without observing vents, pipes sticking out of the ground? That's a Jim question.
Yeah, I would say your best bet is trying to find the as-built. If not, try to follow your system out of your house. Where's your waste pipe go out? Do you know where the septic tank is? From that, just try to keep following out straight. Hopefully you'll find it. I mean, with the drain field, there's no like metal components unless they put down a metal tape, which is required now with the PVC piping. You put it over that, but at least you can find it with a metal detector. But without that, you're really just trying to at best guess and try to dig it up, try to see what you can find, if you will. If there's
Yeah.
no plans on it, I mean, try to find your septic tank and go out from there. It shouldn't be too far from there, you would hope. You know what I mean? You know, a flat part of your area, it should be that somewhere there. But yeah, it's tough if you have nothing really to go on.
Yeah, and they've got those T-bars, the little thin metal rod that you can go down and try to tap it and keep following it, right?
Yeah, that's fine, the septic tank, but I mean, if you wanted to follow I guess you could technically do that with the pipe too. But you'd really be trying to find,
A
you
needle
know,
and a neck, yeah.
yeah, trying to get that pipe as you go further out and out.
You'd have to be pretty accurate. Okay, so why can you not fully excavate a failed septic system and replace the soil with new soil?
I wouldn't know how you would keep the piping the field up, and I mean, you would have to put on staging or something. I don't know.
I'd say technically you could do that. You'd have to pull up all the pipe though, and then excavate deeper than the original field, because it's the biomap that's a problem, right?
Yeah, and then I mean, I hear in Massachusetts it wouldn't be that simple because we would be want to know what's underneath it. Is, do you have that 4 feet of clearance, prior to the highest groundwater table and all that, or they're not just gonna let you dig it up and put something new under it. If you're putting a new system in, we do like a plan. We'll have like a reserve field. So we have this field over here. If it goes right bad, we already know we have another area over there that can be, piped over to and put in. So that'd probably be your best bet that way. But I mean, I've seen it happen because they had no space. Basically, what they did is take the pipe out, dig it all up, bring in all new stuff, and they put new pipe back in. But for all intents and purposes, it was a new field. I mean, you can't really reuse PVC that's glued together.
No, sure.
So
In the soil. And I don't know if it's a regular gravity fed system, could you also not bring in soil and make a mounded system? And you have to put in a pump, but could you bring in 8 feet of material and
if need be, it would all be what's underneath there and how old that system is. If the system was put in the 70s and now, you're trying to meet the new code and, it'd be up to the local board of health to say, we want to know what's underneath that soil. That you have that 4 feet clearance. And if they needed to bring it up 4 feet from where the ground surface is, that's what they wanted to propose. I guess that would legitimately make that 4 feet of clearance, but then they'd have
that's what I was wondering. I just thought,
a
well,
5 foot mound.
yeah,
Most people would probably want to at least get a couple of feet underneath the ground, so they only have like a 3 foot mound. So, and
sure.
local boards of health here too can also be more stringent than they are down at the Cape. You could have a 5 foot clearance to groundwater when you get down to the Cape with a sandy soil. So you can even go higher up. So
Sure. Okay. When it's cold outside, occasionally there is a sewage smell around the house and in the bathroom. Any thoughts on what is driving this?
only when it's cold out. I usually hear about it more when it's warm out. You know, not really. No, I mean, no, top of my head, I can't imagine why it would only be when it's cold. My only maybe the biological processes are slowing down, so you're not getting it as robust of a treatment, so it's having more of an odor. Be my only guesstimate, I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. So, no, it's interesting. Okay, if there are old tall trees on what we estimate to be outside the edge of the septic drainage leach field, a few feet away from the perimeter, could some of those trees' roots eventually go and disrupt the drainage line in a drainage field? If so, and we don't want to cut those trees down, should we use copper sulfate root kill? Would that make it out of the tank and into the drainage field lines to impact any small long roots that may potentially make their way to the edge of the field? Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd still say, it's one of those catch-22s. I think it's going to ruin the biologicals, but I always suggest cutting the trees before that because it's just going to be an ongoing thing, if you will.
Okay. Sorry. How do I know if my system is aerobic or anaerobic? If it's just 2 tanks under the ground with a leach field installed over 40 years ago, is it an anaerobic system?
You would, if it's an aerobic system, you would have some sort of electrical connection to it.
Yeah.
To basically make the bubbles. And usually there'd be some sort of vent as well to off gas, all that, extra air you're putting into the tank. I mean, when it says there's 2 tanks under the ground, that could be a septic tank in your D box, or that could be, a septic tank in the aeration chamber. So I couldn't tell you just from that. 40 years ago, most likely it's not, though.
Okay, so I just Googled this whole copper sulfate thing just to be sure. And basically it says that copper sulfate has been added, okay, in tests, it's been added to septic tanks without harming the bacteria action in the tanks. However, it also says you should never put it through anywhere in your house because it will corrode the metal pipe, corrode your pipes if you have metal pipes.
Huh?
So that's something, and that's, I need to look this up a little more before I.
I wondered too, if you have an older system, you might have cast iron pipes and whatnot. So that, even getting into your septic system might cause problems.
Yeah, okay. If there is a very rainy period, wow, and the soil is really saturated, is there anything that can be done to help with the drainage field work in those wet conditions?
No, I would advise you to try to keep your flows down though, till it dries out, if you will. We're experiencing that here too, where the Massachusetts and where I live, it's the rainiest July on record, and it's the 20th. So, it's there's a lot going on, but I would let everything dry out and just try to keep your flows down to as low as possible right now. The last thing the ground needs is more water after 20 inches of rain.
Yeah, that's a lot of rain.
Yeah, that's more than here.
You even see wells that don't flow start flowing sometimes because of that much rain. It just puts too much pressure on the aquifer. I have an aerobic system with a sleeve for chlorine tablets. The water level seems to never get high enough to dissolve the tablets. I add maybe 3 tabs a year. Is this a problem or by design?
I would have to, I don't know about that design. I have never seen a on-site septic system with chlorine in it. So I wouldn't be able to tell you. I think I've only seen wastewater treatment plants that are putting their effluent into a water body like a river, use chlorine. And usually dechlor too, probably before put it in, but I've never seen a septic system utilizing chlorine.
Yeah, that's different. Obviously, it was built that way.
Yeah, it's not something I could opine on because I've never seen it.
Yeah, I have no experience there either. I'm sorry. Okay, what does the site pipe in a distribution box show you?
A site pipe. I'm gonna hope that means your manhole to look in. For a D-box, what we'd be looking for is with the moisture going in is equal distribution to all the pipes. And if not, D-boxes can move, they can break, and so there is ways to modify that flow with different devices without replacing the D-box. But I would imagine you mean looking in from the manhole, basically from above. That's what we'd be looking for, is equal flow to each pipe.
Okay. On some of the older systems, the leach field was Orangeburg. Wouldn't moles digging that cause issues in that case? I I don't know what this is.
I've heard
I'm not sure what that
Orangeburg
is
piping.
either.
Yeah,
What'd
I've
you
heard
say?
of Orangeburg piping, but no experience with it. I think I've heard of it in drinking water for whatever reason, but
Yeah, that makes it, wouldn't moles digging that cause issues in that case? Let's go on. I'm going to look that up. If I have
yeah,
two tanks,
I'd
go
like to
ahead.
say a mole can't get through any kind of pipe. I mean, I imagine that's some sort of plastic type in the wording of it, but
Yeah, I don't know. If I have two tanks, but only one has a riser, what's the best way to find the access port for the other one?
most likely digging. You can use a prob to get into the ground, trying to figure out where the edges of that tank is and kind of dig in the middle. But ideally, there should be an inlet and an outlet riser for any septic tank.
Okay, so Orangeburg pipe is it's a fiber pipe made from layers of ground wood pulp fibers compressed with and bound by a water-resistant adhesive. So they probably can dig through it.
Yeah,
It's an issue of whether they would, you have to understand. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly possible. It's a matter of if, yeah. So, yeah, I don't have an answer. I guess we don't have an answer for that. It's, you see a lot of old types of pipe. Even cities still have wooden pipes in some cases, really old cities that still work.
mm-hmm.
So those certainly would be at risk of those things.
Yeah. It sounds like it would be fibers and stuff. Like it would be not as long lasting as a PVC would be.
Okay, we're getting into the weeds here. So read this because it's pretty funny. A little old lady built her house in the 50s. She flushed a pound of ground beef down her toilet every year and never pumped her tank. The inspector said the tank, the clay baffles, and the 5 points in the field all look great. What are your thoughts on this? Ever heard of something so crazy? I certainly haven't. And there's got to be more to the story, would be my opinion here. So,
Yeah, I don't even understand why you would flush a pound of ground beef down the toilet, but
what we do know is that if you manage your system as recommended, it should work fine. And that's really what matters. And I don't think putting a pound of ground beef, I don't know what it would do to eliminate the solids that you're still going to build up in your tank.
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I think it would just add to it.
Yeah, no, it's all interesting, but certainly not something we can comment on here. Okay, someone planted, so when I looked at the questions a while ago, there were only 19 and now we're up to 27 here, so which is fine. Someone planted fruit trees next to our drain field. I presume we need to move them. How far away should they be so their roots won't interfere? I'm in Colorado. I think you already answered that. Safe distance be twice the height that you expect the trees to get. You agree?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to identify the location of my leach field pipe so I can assess whether or not I have trees that I need to be removed. I know the general location of the leach field, but not the exact location.
Yeah,
So
again, best bet is trying to find a as-built. After that, you're really, digging and trying for the best, if you will.
Yeah.
Because there's no components of a leach field that are, you can find in a metal detector or anything like that.
No. You'd almost need to see, I mean, yeah, you said it best. You need to see original design and where it was supposed to be placed and assume it's in the right place and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our plumber had us shock our water softener with iron out and had us put a bit in the toilet tanks. They were scummy. Is iron out bad for the system? Softener discharge flows into septic.
I would say so. I mean, you know, we don't allow any treatment discharge to go into the septic in Massachusetts. So I would imagine, you know, any of that would be not good. Plus, it seems like, you know, if you put an iron out, you probably put a big slug of iron into the system at once. So I couldn't tell you, you know, having a lot of extra metals in there does something good or bad, but just that wouldn't seem like a good thing.
Yeah, it says basically you run it through your softener and then you have to backwash to clean the system up before you use regular drinking water in the system. But not knowing what's in iron out for sure, that'd be a hard question to answer. Yeah, you know, it's some kind of chemical though, and that, you know, typically wouldn't be. Yeah, I don't see
Not a
anything
good.
quickly. So you just need to look up what's in iron out and then determine, you know, if that is something that is harmful to bacteria, really.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's, you know, basically taking iron oxide and putting it back in solution, so to speak, there's still iron there, and when it gets into your septic tank, you know, it could be turning your tank red, even. I mean, I don't know that. I'm just saying it's going to go somewhere, and it's eventually going to oxidize again. Follow up if we don't run out of time. By inlet and outlet riser for each tank, what does that mean? I should have 4 total risers for my 2-tank system. Currently, I only have a single riser.
Yes, I mean each tank should have an inlet and an outlet. So yeah, you would need 4. If you only have one single riser for both tanks, then the second one you have no access to. Most likely, they're probably the front of each one, so the inlet where most of the stuff will build up. But ideally, to pump right and to inspect the tanks, you know, you really want to be able to get in the front and the back of each tank.
Right. Okay, can this question file be shared online for resources? I believe it would be super useful as a foundational material to build septic workshops for the general public. Yeah, why don't you email us? I mean, this file, you know, this whole video is going to be online. But as far as sharing the actual thing, we haven't done that in the past. We do use it, but yeah. Let's discuss that. Send me an email. If you have to shock your water well with bleach to kill coliform, then you're risking having your septic not work well for a few days as you run the water through your system, right? Well, it depends on, you know, you're mixing the chlorine to, you know, around 300 ppm, I believe, and you're letting it sit overnight. And what we recommend is you actually discharge that not through your septic. I mean, obviously some of it has to, you know, some of it can be run through, again, you know, say a garden hose. Obviously some of it's going to go through your system and get in your septic if it's going down your sink or your shower drain, but not all of it necessarily. And I guess the other side of that is you're putting some in, you know, even laundry detergent and things like that. It's just a matter of overloading it. So, I don't know, you have any thoughts there, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, if you're bleaching your well right, you're not putting that high of a dose in. And ideally, the bleach is staying in your system for a number of times to make sure you're getting through all the pipes and all that, and your storage tank and all that. So, and with that level of chlorine and then diluted when you're actually, you know, then flushing that chlorine out, Is it going to have some effect? It probably will. It probably won't neutralize the whole system, but at the same time, it's kind of a cost benefit. It's more important to get rid of the bacteria that you're ingesting as opposed to the ones cleaning your poop, if you will. So, it's one of those things that, ideally you wish you didn't have to do, but, the well's more important to get the bacteria. So, if you do have a little bit of issues in your septic tank,
Well,
it's worth it. And like I said, the chlorine dose you're putting in the chuck, the well shouldn't be, you shouldn't be dumping a whole gallon down to do one well.
right. And the other side of that is, if it sits in your pipes overnight and it's actually killing bacteria, it's being used up.
Hmm.
Certainly cases where if you have a real significant problem with maybe even biofilms on some of your pipes, leaving it overnight isn't enough. Get rid of all of it because the chlorine gets used up. I worked with a gentleman who actually, for a really tough situation, they kind of moved the water 2 or 3 times without running it all the way out so that fresh chlorine could reach the really bad spots that were in the line. And because the chlorine gets used up as it's killing the bacteria. And so what you're putting in isn't actually what would be going out in the end anyway, because some of it's not there anymore. So again, I think what Jim said is correct. It certainly could cause some damage, but it shouldn't mess up your whole system. But even if it was going to, and you knew that, you should just pump your tank and start over because you have to get your well fixed, if you will, first. The most critical thing. I missed the webinar, but I have a question. What types of problems might result and how would they be manifested in the leach field if a recently under-designed on-site wastewater treatment system for a small vacation type development in a campground area was experiencing higher than expected crowds? Oh my gosh. So Katie, so someone just sent us an email and you added it?
Yeah, I figured maybe while we have Jim on, it might be something we can have here.
Okay.
Yeah, this is something I've seen a lot, especially in the vacation communities in New England. Someone rents a house and the whole family comes, big 4th of July party, or, it's Memorial Day weekend, kick off the summer, the whole family comes. This could really cause problems because, the system is designed for a certain number of people. It hasn't really been utilized all summer. All of a sudden, it's 3 times the people in there. Everyone's eating, drinking. It's being used. It's in a sensitive area next to water, and things fail. The leach field can't take that much of a flow going in, or there's just so much solids going in there, and the system has no biological process revved up yet. So definitely something that could cause it, and if it's under designed, that just adds to the issue, if you will. If it's so, probably frequent pumping would probably be your best bet, because, like I mentioned, if it's not really something that's used all the time, the biological processes are starting fresh, and like I meant, Memorial Day weekend, and then close the place up Labor Day weekend. It's the process is really just start getting going maybe in mid-July, August, and then we're closing it back up again, and it just goes right back down. So this is a very common thing, but more frequent pumping probably the easiest answer for a scenario like this.
Okay, so 17. I can't get to that right now. Hang on just a second.
That was the question about the cold weather where the smell was coming into the house occasionally.
It's only cold outside. When it's cold outside, occasionally there's a sewage smell around the house and in the bathroom. Any thoughts? Well, I went too far. Look out. It's the only drawback to this, Katie. Could be that the vent pipes may be freezing over in the house, not allowing gases to escape.
But ideally, you know, the piping underneath should have a vent drain with water in it to keep any gases from coming into the house too. So I've seen it sometimes with floor drains. I see it a lot in restaurants when I used to be a health inspector. Floor drains that have a trap to keep the gases out, but they don't pour any water down them, so the trap dries out and lets gases in. But you know, if the trap has water in it, I don't know how the odor would get past that part of it.
Right. Yeah, so here's several other comments here involving odor around the house. Yeah. All right. And this ground penetrating radar services that can locate your septic field pipes. And I believe that would be true. That's amazing what they can see these days with and the accuracy with some of that stuff. Well, we're well over, and I appreciate everyone staying. Let me get to this. You can email us at info@privatewellclass.org. You should get an email in an hour or so, anyone who's participating in this webinar, and it will have my email address on it. So if anyone I've said, please email me, you're more than welcome to email me directly as well. Jim, thank you so much for all your time today and for all the interesting questions. And yeah, this is it's always a learning experience for me for sure when we do this. So I really appreciate that, and yeah, and you sharing your experience.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Katie, for keeping us going. And with that, when I end the webinar, I'll lose everybody. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. But thanks for everyone who attended.